Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Nexus 5, Nexus 5X, and the Nexus 6P. They're all reasonably powerful phones that perform pretty well for day-to-day tasks, but these two are a little bit newer, and while they're all running Android 6.0, there are certain things that these guys can do. They've got the fingerprint scanners, they've got higher quality cameras, and some other features. But let's take a look at some basic performance tests here. Let's turn them over and turn them on. Now, I've only got two hands here, so I'm going to hit the power button on these guys at the same time. And let's turn on the last one. So it's running a little bit behind here. Now, these two phones are made by LG for Google, whereas the 5.7-inch Nexus 6P was made by Huawei. Has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 800 processor, quad-core. This has a 6-core Snapdragon 808 chip and an octa-core Snapdragon 810 processor. Released in 2013, released in 2015. And these two have 1920 by 1080 pixel displays, 5-inch and 5.2-inch, versus a 5.7-inch 2560 by 1440 pixel display. And you'll notice that the oldest one actually boots fastest here. Now this might differ a little depending on the software that you're running, but overall there's not a huge difference there. While these do have fingerprint sensors that let you log in, when you do a complete reboot, you do need to enter a passcode. So I'm going to do that here. And then let's run some benchmarks. Let's start off here with Geekbench. That's the wrong one. Geekbench. Okay. Let's see if I can get all of these at the same time. So there you go in terms of scores. You can see there's a pretty big difference between them, although they all completed the tests pretty close to one another in terms of time. Let's take a look at graphics with GFX Bench 3.1. And just for expediency here, we're going to do an abbreviated version of the test. And make sure we're running the same version of the test on all the devices. Now, the older phone can't support OpenGL ES 3.1, so we're just going to go with 3.0 and 2.0 here. Turn off the other areas. And again, try to start them all at the same time. Or pretty close to the same time. So now we've got the Nexus 5 on the bottom, Nexus 5X above it, and the Nexus 6P at the top. So interestingly, the test hasn't even started on these guys yet. but you can see that it's a little bit choppy in terms of video playback here. Or not really, video playback is rendering the 3D graphics capabilities. Much smoother on both of the newer devices. Alright, so Nexus 5 is out. And we've got 10 frames per second for the Manhattan test and 24 frames per second for the T-Rex test. T-Rex test hasn't even loaded on the other two yet, but I suspect that the frame rates are going to be much, much better. Now, I also tried running the Antutu benchmark, but it kept timing out in the Nexus 5, so I might run that again, but just on the newer devices, because there was some sort of error that kept it from completing properly on the Nexus 5. But you can see we've got much smoother looking graphics, again, on the Nexus 5X and the Nexus 6P. So while they're taking longer to perform this test, the overall quality seems to be substantially better. Alright, so this time we've got 16 frames per second for Manhattan, 38 frames per second for T-Rex, 19 frames per second for Manhattan, and 43 for T-Rex. So again, to compare, that is 10, 16, 19, 24, 38, and 43. So there's your graphics performance differences. Now again, Antutu sort of timed out when I tried to run it on the Nexus 5, but just for kicks, let's go ahead and fire that up and run one more set of tests. Oops. Now these both have 64-bit processors, which allows them to run a slightly different version of the test as well. So let's go ahead and run this test and see what happens. So again, these are benchmarks that look at very specific things in terms of CPU power for calculating numbers, for rendering graphics, for doing other specific tasks. In terms of day-to-day performance, they're all pretty fast phones that are pretty responsive, and it's hard to tell the difference. The new phones do have some special features like better cameras, fingerprint sensors, and so on. But the main difference that we're seeing here is that when it comes to things like graphics performance, they're going to do a better job with certain types of games than the older Nexus 5. Now that said, there's also a difference in size. Even though this is a 5.2-inch screen versus 5 inches, you can tell that it is a substantially larger phone. It's a little bit harder to hold in one hand. I'll have more details about that and other differences between the newer phones and the older ones, and between the two new phones in upcoming videos. But I just wanted to do a quick analysis of benchmark results. So that's what I'm doing here. And we've got the first one to hit the graphics sets. Again, keep in mind we've got a higher resolution display here, so it has to work a little harder to fill all those pixels. And odds are this is going to run into trouble right there. Yep. All right, so in terms of score here, with an incomplete test, we're getting somewhere around 27,000. Might not be entirely accurate. Here, we're getting 49,375 and 58,155. So again, these are scores, the higher the better, that look at, generally speaking, overall performance in terms of CPU, RAM, graphics, storage performance. And you can see a breakdown here. That the CPU performance is 6401 here versus 7942. The graphics performance for 2D graphics is 1661 versus 2371. 3D graphics 14709 versus 20093. So in every respect, the version with the Snapdragon 810 octa-core processor does outperform the version with the hexa-core processor. Now that said, some people on other devices have noticed that with Snapdragon 810 chips, machines, if they're sort of operating at full speed for extended periods, it can affect battery life, it can affect performance, the CPU might throttle. So these tests might not be indicative of real-world performance, but having spent about a day or two with these phones, I just wanted to run the benchmarks and get some baseline results in terms of these benchmarks. For the most part, I don't pay that much attention to these sorts of results. What I really care more about is sort of how generally responsive the phones are when it comes to firing up applications, opening a web browser, doing searches, the sort of activities that you really do on a more day-to-day basis. But if you're into gaming and you want to make sure you're getting maximum frame rates, then these sort of tests can help you figure out whether that's going to be possible. It's also worth noting that we've got 3 GB of RAM on this model and 2 gigs on the other two models. So that is a quick look at some performance measures of the Nexus 5, Nexus 5X, and the Nexus 6P.